Yesterday, Dr. Fauci went on CNN and tried to answer this question. Should the vaxxed and boosted feel safe going out to restaurants and eating indoors? Check out his answer.
We are seeing people who are vaccinated and boosted who are getting breakthrough infections. So when you're in a situation where you have so many infections going out, the thing that you want to say is that if you want to do things like that, better do them in a setting where you know the people around you are vaccinated and boosted.
Let me get this straight, Dr. Fauci. The vaxxed and boosted are getting COVID, so you should make sure that you only hang out with the vaxxed and boosted? Well, where's the logic in that? And aren't you forgetting a group? I have a few friends who got COVID over the holidays. Some were vaxxed and boosted, and some weren't. But all of them had symptoms that weren't all that serious, which is a good thing. One of my buddies who's not vaccinated and who's not political at all called me a couple days ago and said, "You know what I think? After you get COVID, the government should give you a vaccine card." Now that's a thought a logical person would have. And that's the group that Dr. Fauci forgets to talk about. It's bad enough that he says stupid stuff like what we just saw in that clip, but what about the millions of us who have natural immunity? Why are we being ignored? If I've had COVID and that gives me natural immunity, why wouldn't I now be considered in the same group as the vaxxed? Here in Los Angeles, where I work, why wouldn't I be allowed to go into restaurants and gyms? I have antibodies against COVID. So I educated my friend. I told him, did you know that in the past 2 years, our government hasn't done a single study about natural immunity? Not one. That's crazy, isn't it? In a recent hearing, Congressman Jim Jordan questioned Dr. Marty McCary from Johns Hopkins about this very thing.
What's the budget at CDC? Do you happen to know that?
CDC, it's about $9 billion, sir.
How about at NIAID? What's the budget there?
$6 billion.
6 billion, 9 billion at CDC, 6 billion NIAID. What about NIH? What's the budget there?
Between 42 and 43 billion.
42 and 43. So I do the quick math. That's like 58 billion dollars. That's annual, right?
Annual.
Okay. And you know how many people work at CDC?
31,000 people between CDC and NIH.
31,000 people spending $58 billion a year. Why hasn't our government done a study on natural immunity?
If I can be honest, Representative Jordan, I don't think they want to know the answer. It would undermine the indiscriminate vaccination policy for every single human being, including extremely low-risk people.
So, how many Americans have got COVID since we've had this virus? Do you know?
North of half of Americans, based on a Columbia University study that showed 1 in 3 had COVID at the end of last year, a year ago.
So there's certainly a sufficient sample size to do a study, and there's 57 to 58 billion dollars. You could use some of that money to do a study. And then, of course, you got 30-some thousand people who could conceivably do a study on a pretty fundamental question.
Now, why wouldn't our government want to know how strong natural immunity is and how long it lasts? More than half of America has already had COVID, and with the latest surge, it looks like a lot more are going to get it. So wouldn't it be important to know that information? There have been studies done in other countries that suggest natural immunity is actually superior to vaccine immunity. If that's true, wouldn't people who are focused on getting as many Americans as possible to have immunity against COVID want to know how strong natural immunity really is? You'd assume so, right? But you'd be wrong. Now the question that then poses itself is, why don't those in charge want to understand natural immunity? And I think it's because they don't want to have evidence that many of those who've had COVID have no reason to get vaccinated. When you factor in 2 shots and a booster, that's hundreds of millions of doses that won't be purchased. And they're already talking about a second booster. It's the same with children and young adults. The science suggests that healthy young adults and children have little to no benefit from being vaccinated. And yet they're pushing hard for 5-year-olds to take the jab. The obvious conclusion is that this is all about money. I mean, money makes the world go round, right? Is Dr. Fauci so tied to pharmaceutical companies that he can't do the right thing? Is he willing to be completely ignorant about natural immunity because he's afraid that the truth will cause a few 100 million doses of vaccines to go unsold? If that's true, he should be fired. If that's not true, then we deserve an answer to that question. Why don't those in power want to understand natural immunity? The CDC and the NIH have spent over $100 billion the past 2 years and haven't done one single study about natural immunity concerning COVID. That's unbelievable. It has to be about the money, right? But you know what would be really scary? If it wasn't about the money. Just imagine if the people in charge are not getting rich from their connections to Big Pharma. What then? The imagination runs wild, doesn't it? If it's not about the money, then why would they push a vaccine onto 5-year-olds that not only has little to no benefit for them, but rather poses a small risk to them? And why would you ignore someone already having immunity if your goal was to get everyone some immunity? Are people starting to see that what our government has done and has not done doesn't seem to be in our best interest? Are people like my friend starting to wake up? Was it necessary to shut down the economy and destroy thousands of businesses? Is it necessary to push COVID vaccines onto our children? And should we be ignoring natural immunity? Those are questions that are starting to be asked by people who thought Dr. Fauci and the Democrats were making all their decisions out of a concern for the rest of us. Regular people who have just been going along are starting to ask some of the same questions we've been asking for a long time. But don't get your hopes up. I don't think we'll get any answers. Because as we saw in that first clip, Dr. Fauci refuses to talk about those of us with natural immunity. I just hope the reason is greed and not something far more sinister. And that's the simple truth. Hey guys, thanks for watching. And if you all want to support this channel, check out the links in the description and let's keep putting some common sense back into the great debate.